My name is Scott Speck, music director of the West Michigan Symphony, and we have two very special guests with us. First, over there with his back to you, is our guest artist for the week. This is Tim Fain, our violinist. And you will see him on both Friday and Saturday evenings. And then we have, especially for Saturday, who we've brought in, a composer whose music we've played before and whose music I have played or conducted many times. This is Randall Woolf. So there we go. We have both of them here because we're going to be talking a little bit about Friday night as well as Saturday night in today's Lunch and Learn. Tim is really the connection between both because Tim Fain is playing a piece by Randy on Saturday's concert, and he's going to be playing a piece by Vivaldi as recomposed by Max Richter on Friday night. I'll be conducting Friday and just enjoying along with you on Saturday. Also on the program for Friday night is Mozart's amazing Jupiter Symphony. Amazing is a bad word because it's way too overused. It's a life-changing piece of music. We may spend less time talking about it because we've got people from the other pieces right here with us, and I think it would be a shame not to spend as much time as possible talking with them and listening to them. But I will say that Mozart's Jupiter Symphony is among the greatest, not only one of the greatest pieces of music ever composed, but one of the greatest creations of humanity ever created. And that can be summed up by what you hear in the final movement when Mozart gives us, in quick succession, 5 different themes and then proceeds to play all of them at the same time. It's just amazing, and we'll show that and we'll demonstrate that at the concert. But for now, let's start with Friday night's concerto, which is called, what's it called? Vivaldi Recomposed?
Vivaldi Recomposed.
Vivaldi Recomposed. Max Richter is a living composer who followed in the footsteps of Philip Glass. You could think of it as next generation Philip Glass, in the idea of minimalism, where you take a musical idea and repeat it over and over and over and over. And Tim, you may be able to shed some light onto why he decided to take, of all things, Vivaldi's 4 Seasons and work his magic on it.
Well, I think that had something to do with the fellow violinist Daniel Hope, who commissioned the piece, to have something, to take a piece that was iconic, if you will, in the rep for us violinists, and to mess with it. And Max really has a wonderful history of he comes from the world of DJing and electronic music, and I can imagine that it was just right up his alley. Max and I have met a couple of times. I don't know him that well, but I know enough to know that he really gets very excited by taking things apart and putting them back together. And you can hear that in some of his music, some of his score for Waltz with Bashir. But I think more so in this piece, you hear fragments of Vivaldi. Sometimes he'll spend an entire movement just on one tiny cell, one small motivic fragment from the Seasons. And there's one thing that he does very, very well. There's many things he does very well, but one thing in particular, taking one small fragment, starting off very soft, building and building and building and building until you almost feel that it can't grow any farther, and then it stops abruptly.
That's something
extremely effective.
That's something that Philip Glass certainly mastered as well, right? You have, not necessarily always with the building and building and building, but the idea of having something that's very repetitive and then cuts off. That's something that Philip Glass very much pioneered, I think, in minimalist music, and you can hear that in a lot of his music.
Yeah, in some ways, it comes down to a sense of timing, how you want to. In some of Philip's earlier music, it really is music as less of a sort of a linear storytelling technique, but more as almost as if one were spinning a prayer wheel, just watching it circle, turn round and round and round. And
it's very meditative.
I think at its best, at its best when it really works, incredibly meditative, yeah.
What I find that Max Richter seems to do that maybe adds to this is, I'm not sure if it's the particular chord progressions that he uses or perhaps the melodic elements that he puts over the Vivaldi music, but it's something that's very much for our time. It's something that I feel that maybe couldn't have been composed 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but it just feels right for this time and place. Why is that? Or do you agree? Maybe not.
Yeah, I do. He loves to create musical space, is the way I think about it. He uses resonance in instruments like the harp, sustain in instruments like the strings, combining them in a way that I think creates a sort of musical depiction of space. And the chord progressions he uses, I think, just by virtue of using any sort of repetition, I think that does speak to our age in terms of chord progressions that have been used so many times from the Beatles and before and through into hip hop. This sort of idea of mechanical representation as a creating this feeling of just mechanization and kind of an expression of oppression, even a sort of like a anger through music of oppression and kind of this feeling of just relentlessness in a way. And taking that, but using it in a completely different way, almost to create a sense of flying and space.
Yeah, if I could just pick up on that. Gabe, are you able to play the second Vivaldi excerpt that you told me about? If you might be able to cue that one up. It's from Summer, from the Four Seasons. You know, first of all, I should probably say that all of us had a certain level of trepidation at programming a different version of the Four Seasons, not because we didn't think it was good, but because everyone expects the original version of the Four Seasons. And the thing is that the Four Seasons by Vivaldi, as simple as they are very groundbreaking for their time and are really great music. I mean, every one of the 12 movements in those four concertos is innovative in an amazing way. The tone painting, the way that the poems talking about the seasons, which Vivaldi himself wrote, are so literally depicted in the music, and the violin technique that's used to create that. And then what I think is very interesting is the repetition, which I could imagine Richter saw as great fodder for creating minimalist music, because repetition, minimalist music almost inevitably includes repetition. But you were talking about something that's oppressive but also creates space. And
or using a technique that has been used by artists in the world of hip hop in a certain way to create a texture of relentless urban landscape.
And I thought that if we could play this excerpt from Summer, if it's what I think it is, Gabe, that you'll hear this relentlessness, and it's repeated by Vivaldi, but then when Max Richter takes it, he repeats it even more and more and more. And then over that comes an absolutely soaring violin solo, which creates the space that I think you're talking about. Well, let's see if this is what we're listening to. This is the very beginning of this. By the way, this is exactly Vivaldi's beginning of Summer. Not even any change, I think, at the beginning. This is supposed to depict feeling very dragged out and very, very tired on a hot summer day. Now coming up as the violin solo comes in, it's a depiction of the cuckoo. You can hear the cuckoo bird, but then see what Richter does with it. so far that's all Vivaldi. Now comes Richter. So several things that we were just talking about, right? The sudden ending, the feeling of oppressiveness, and the soaring over that, creating some space, and all of that is Richter's particular take on Vivaldi. I think that's really cool.
Well, yeah, he's a master of the short form in the minimalist world. And I think in that way, these seasons really so perfect. It's a perfect kind of vehicle for him in a way.
Do you think of the seasons, because it's written as, originally it was 4 different concertos that were presented, in fact, as part of a larger group of concertos, and we are the ones who said this is the 4 seasons, you know, and for the last couple hundred years have presented it that way, but it's really 4 different concertos. In this version, it's one piece that has movements called Spring 1, Spring 2, Spring 3, Summer 1, Summer 2, Summer 3, etc. Do you think of it as 4 different pieces, or do you think of it as all connected as one? How do you think of it?
Well, you know, they're so tied in with Vivaldi's music. It's difficult for me to really separate them in that way. But of course, conceptually, I know that Vivaldi was hugely prolific, and so many pieces for solo instrument and group that he wrote follow a very similar formal kind of method. So in that way, yes, I know that Richter has kind of put them more into a box in that way, but I don't really think about that too much.
There are people who say Vivaldi wrote the same concerto 600 times, but it's absolutely not true. 300 tops, and the rest were original. I want to play a little bit of the other movement, if we could. One of the things that you heard from this is that he obsesses on, as one way to put it, one of the particular motives or ideas in the music. And there are certain movements of this where the entire movement of a Vivaldi concerto is represented in the Richter version by just one little motive, and that's all he spends time engaging with for the entire length of the movement that he's paying tribute to. And one example of that is the beginning of Spring, which is also the very beginning of the whole piece. You probably remember from Vivaldi Spring that after the initial bum 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 ba da dum da da dum dun dun da da da, that there are then some little bird calls. Bird calls are done by the violin solo and by 1 or 2 other violinists in the orchestra. What he does in the case of Spring first movement is he obsesses on those bird calls alone. That's all you get for his version of Spring. So let's listen to the beginning of that. This is an electronic intro that actually we are not performing, but that's all right. It's short.
Yeah, this is Max essentially sort of DJing connections between the different pieces.
Here we go. You remember this part? Okay, let's fade it out. So, yeah, it's you see, it sort of starts from I won't say exactly from nothing, but it starts from just one or two voices, and then more and more. And then what is so incredibly modern is this chord progression, the sort of carpet of sound that Max Richter invented to put underneath. And it's not necessarily the chord progression that Vivaldi himself would have done either. That's what makes it so modern, I think. But at the same time, it's timeless and beautiful. I mean, the first time we listened to it with great skepticism, saying, are we going to actually do this? Are we going to not do the original Vivaldi, but do a different version? First time we listened to it, we were sold because it's just so beautiful. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think what also kind of speaks to me personally with what he's done, and this is, we live in a way, in so many ways, a culture of mashups and of remakes and remasters, and whether it's Hollywood, so much of the time we're watching movies that were based on another movie, or based on a musical, or based on a cartoon that was based on a line of children's toys, and and then we're listening to music that's covers of this or covers of that, and storylines. Even if the movie isn't directly based on something, you may be able to find scenes that are just directly ripped off of other things. And I think that's actually kind of a wonderful thing in a way, because it opens up the door to artists to really have a license to pull from other work.
Yes, and anything written before 1923, there is no copyright.
Well, yeah, and then they can do it without even getting permission if it's like before 1923. And so in that way, what he's done with the seasons, I think, really speaks to me, and also just to culture in a larger sense.
Do you want to play something for us? Maybe another little
excerpt? Well, this beginning, these little motives that you hear, it starts off with it's kind of like Hitchcockian. This opening, you start off with, actually, we'll just go unplug for a second. It starts off with one little bird. in the piece. Actually, the whole of Spring. I think at least 2 out of the 3 movements follow that very sort of Max Richter tried and true sort of ramp up, gradual ramp up. Very extremely effective.
I think quite a few of the movements in the whole Four Seasons have that. And also, you know, but what genius that the idea of starting with one bird and then having another bird and more birds, that was originally
And that's
Vivaldi's.
Vivaldi, of course. Yeah, that's all
Vivaldi. It's so amazing. I mean, we really tend to, when I say we, I don't mean me, but I mean, I used to underestimate Vivaldi because it sounds so facile and so easy and so right. But the older I get, the more I think that's the hardest stuff to write, you know? A really great song that won't leave you, or a really beautiful melody that sticks with you forever, that's really, really difficult to do. And the people who write seemingly much more complex music, but that you forget after you've heard once, you know, it may be, it may absolutely be worth revisiting and getting to know better. But the things that grab you right from the first are pretty amazing.
That's really great. And I love that with a piece like The Seasons, he's essentially, you know, taken the picture off the wall and stuck it, you know, in a different room, and you look at it in a very different way. He takes in winter something and puts it into a framework of time that is something that would never have been done in Vivaldi's times. Takes it, sticks it into 7, a beat pattern of 7.
You want to play the original?
And he takes it, gives it a much more relentless quality and puts it into 7.
And the same thing happens when the orchestra comes in with a yum dum bum 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 beep,
Yeah,
beep,
it's
bum,
very
beep.
almost iconic.
Now it's 7. And it goes on like that for 5 minutes. It's pretty amazing. I should say, you know, I mean, I don't know how many of you got to see Tim when he was here last. I think it was the Glass Violin Concerto, wasn't it? Last time? Yeah. So the Philip Glass Violin Concerto, which is an incredible piece, incredibly moving piece, and nobody plays it better than Tim. There's no one alive who plays it better than Tim. And we got him here. And then since then, I think it was since then, is when you saw him on the big screen in Black Swan, if you saw that movie, which I think was a masterpiece. Yeah, it was only a few years ago. He was the violinist that played for all the dancers. Now let's turn to Randy and Randy's piece. So now we're talking about Saturday, which of course you're also going to come to. Randy, first of all, I've worked directly or indirectly with Randall Woolf since about 1996. When I first conducted a piece Randy wrote called Shakedown, and then there was another piece called, was it called White Heat?
White Heat?
White Heat, that I also conducted of Randy's. And then there was another piece called My Insect Bride, and I did all of those about 20 years ago with Randy. And 2 of them since have recently repeated. We did Shakedown here a couple of years ago. I think it was on our winter concert as well. And that was really fun for the orchestra. And then I had a chance just 2 months ago in Chicago to conduct Randy's piece, My Insect Bride, on a Halloween concert of all things. And a really fun piece. Randy's music, when I first heard it, I had never heard anything like it before, because it has a combination of some traditional elements, some very modern elements, and some elements that are just flat out wacky, crazy. And I loved that combination. And Randy, I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about your style, or how your style developed.
Well, I started, like a lot of composers, classical composers my age, I started as a rock musician. And then I went to college. I actually went to Michigan State. And they kept talking about Beethoven string quartets, so I thought I should listen to one. And it was really like a religious conversion. I heard this, and my parents had taken me to Symphony, but I had never really understood classical music, and that piece just took me over, and I dropped everything that I was doing. It took a long time to catch up with classical music, of course, and took private lessons with these 2 really wonderful teachers over about a range of 10 years. And then after I guess I felt I was finally classical, I noticed these elements from my earlier musical life started coming back more and more, and then other people my age are doing a similar kind of a thing. I think I'm happiest when my pieces are played, as you've played them, on a truly classical concert. I was so thrilled to be on a concert with the Brandenburg Concerto in our concert in Chicago. So although there are all these different elements, this mic is a little hot, I think it's feeding back. Thanks. Oh, that's much better. Tim mentioned hip-hop. I think hip-hop right now is the most creative, I mean, not all of it, but the top stuff is the most creative new music in the world right now. And I've gotten a tremendous amount from that. So that's a music I didn't grow up with. I think classical music, really, ever since the Middle Ages, really, has always added in elements from the world around it. There was Gregorian chant, and then people started mixing them with famous folk tunes of the time, like La Maumee. And Mozart brought in Turkish music, and a lot of people don't know the famous habanero from Carmen is actually a popular Spanish song. It wasn't written by Bizet. And I just feel very much a part of that tradition. I love
and
this.
I'll point out, I grew up in Boston, and we have this famous orchestra called the Handel and Haydn Society, right? Which the blue-haired people love to go to hear their old, favorites, and they do a great Messiah every year. The Handel and Haydn Society was founded in the 1800s to promote new music.
That really says something.
Yeah, it really says something. Go back to you.
Oh, so basically that, I mean, by now I feel I guess I've not just caught up, but I'm involved with music like hip-hop or also country music that I didn't. Country actually is much more common in Detroit than people might realize. So that's what I like to do, basically.
So now tell us a little bit about this project. Maybe both of you want to talk about it, this project that you're doing together, and that we had a huge part in making possible.
Absolutely, commissioned it, and it was a piece that really needed a commission because we had to go to Beirut to be able to do it. Tim and I worked together before. He played on several recordings of mine, and we really got along, and I wrote him a solo piece.
For my very first solo CD, actually, Randy's piece was featured on that, Arches.
Thanks. It's called a piece called No Axe to Grind. And on a separate track, I've been working with, I do arranging for a rock musician, John Cale, and we did the score together for the movie American Psycho, which is one of my favorite movies. And afterwards, I had a project with the Akron Symphony that needed a video, and I managed to convince the director, Mary Herron, and her husband, who's also director, John Walsh, to make a video for that, and we really enjoyed doing that. And Mary said, well, we have this Tibetan nanny from a refugee camp in the mountains by Darjeeling, India. We'd like to do a piece about her. I said, well, before with orchestra, I couldn't give you an example. Let's do it for a violin, and then I can give you a recording that's just like that. We did that piece. We did another piece about Kathmandu, Nepal, and this piece about Beirut, and they're all the same in that we discussed the idea together, and then John and Mary go and gather not just video, but also sounds, local music, environmental sounds. They give that to me, and I look at the video. I'm not someone to edit the video, but I make a track that uses some of the found music and found sounds that we have, and give them the piece with a recording of the violin playing it. And they edit the video that they have to the music. So it's the opposite of a usual film score. And we've done 2 of these, and then when I saw that Tim had worked with this orchestra a lot, and Carl was really interested in the black, I said, would you be interested in commissioning a piece about Beirut? Because Mary, the director, said that Beirut is the center of the Arab world for popular music, and it's a really it's like a New York music that is a fascinating mix of cultures. And we were able to get grants to send, also, it's a very complicated story. Then also through the Brooklyn Philharmonic, I was teaching an oud player. The oud is the guitar-like instrument in Arab and Greek and Armenian music. Hadi El-Debek, and he's from Beirut. So this all came together with John and Mary and Hadi going back to Beirut and filming things, giving me all this material, and I created the piece and gave it to Tim, who recorded it, and then they edited the video to that.
Did you need to go, by the way? Did the 2 of you go to Beirut?
I couldn't go to Beirut. The first thing that we all know Beirut mostly from wars and bad things, violence and so forth. That's very exceptional there. The first thing that one of the directors, John, said when he came back is it's such a relaxing place. Mostly it's a place you go to get a mint tea and listen to this kind of music. There's every kind of religion, every kind of ethnic group there, and unfortunately wars have broken out over time, but other than that, it's actually a very genteel small town and a happy place to be. And we really wanted to not make a sort of doom-laden piece about, the horrors of war, but really just make a portrait of the city.
And how did the title come about?
Well, Hadi, the oud player was sort of our guide there. He was explaining all these different cultures, that there's the Armenians there, there's the Christian sector, there's all different types of people. And he said, Beirut is like a house of many rooms. And you go into this one room and then come out and go to another. And we thought that really fit the world that we were presenting in the video.
So this, as part of the Saturday performance by Tim, is not the whole thing. It's part of it, right? It's like 20 minutes long.
That's
is that
the whole
right?
thing.
That's
It's not a feature film.
I mean, is that the whole performance?
Yeah.
That you're doing? Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, that's not Tim's whole concert.
There'll be some other things. Randy's piece will be. I'll play that in its entirety. There will be some other pieces on the program as well, though.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think we're gonna. Gabe and I are gonna work this out. I think I have some pieces which I've produced over the years in collaboration with a variety of different artists and videographers, which I would love to share with you. Some pieces from particularly from a project that I produced called Portals, which is kind of a look into what we're all doing as performing artists in the digital age, and what that all kind of means. So there are pieces that involve a collaboration between myself as a live musician and what you're seeing on screen, whether it's a pianist or some dancers. Some pieces by living American composers. So I think you really enjoy it. I certainly hope so. And this seems like a perfect space to do this. I'm seeing all sorts of interesting little toys up on the wall and things to play around with. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I see. First of all, Tim arrived in Muskegon about 10 minutes ago, just so you know. So this is his first time seeing the block. Also flew overnight, we have.
Well, I've actually had 2 overnight flights in the last 24 hours. Had a concert in New York day before yesterday, and then flew out to LA, had a concert there last night. And then a very special concert. It was very, very wonderful. And then took the last flight out early this morning, around 1, and here we are. I'm so happy to be here. This is wonderful. Really, really wonderful to be back.
So, while Tim is still awake, let's see if you folks have some questions. This is usually my favorite part, because the things that you want to know are the things that we want to know. Yes.
You had in Los Angeles.
Recently, I played a whole bunch of violin in a film that's in theaters as we speak. It's called Moonlight, and just picked up Best Picture at the Golden Globes a couple nights ago. My friend Nicholas Bertel wrote the score, and as is always the case when I'm working with a composer on a score, I did a bit of arranging in it as well, and really kind of you get it. There's a couple of pieces in that film which are quite involved for the violin. One in particular, as the main character in his youngest stage in the film is being essentially taught how to swim. It's almost as if you're watching a baptism. And so Nick and I did the concert, a concert of playing the film score live to picture last night with violin, piano, and orchestra. And the whole cast was there. It was a very special evening. And I was sad not to really be able to stick around for that, but it just worked out like clockwork somehow. And I know there was a huge amount of effort on the part of the symphony here to make it so that I could fit that in to the schedule. And I'm deeply appreciative to everybody here, for Perry and Carla and of course Scott and everybody who kind of bent over backwards to help make that happen.
Cool. I mean, I just think it's really cool that Tim, from the beginning, almost from the beginning, has been involved in different kinds of projects than your typical concerto soloist. I think when I first met you, you were with Young Concert Artists, right? Which is a wonderful organization that promotes people who maybe have just come on the scene and identifies them first of all, and then promotes them in a really big way, and then makes them available really cheap to orchestras. I mean, sometimes it's like 2 for the price of 1 and stuff like that. So it wasn't too much of a gamble on Tim. And then you're like, wow, he's amazing. And then almost immediately, so you started as a sort of more of a traditional soloist, but then almost immediately got into these more out there projects.
Young Concert Artists is a wonderful, wonderful organization. And I hadn't even finished at Juilliard yet, and actually almost didn't graduate from Juilliard because I'd started traveling and performing with young concert artists, and they didn't seem to take too well to that at Juilliard. They thought I was going to be a teacher or something. But young concert artist Susan has a real plan, and we tried that plan out, and I think right from the get-go she understood that I really wanted to really kind of incorporate all these different loves that I had into it. And she was wonderful with really understanding that, and at the same time, young concert artists is almost an extension of school in a way. They give you a kind of a safe place to explore and to try this thing out, which was touring, and really, and I just, it was clearly just the best thing I'd ever done, and a great education and a great start off, and they do make it. I think they have wonderful relationships with a lot of orchestras.
They do, because the price is right, among other things. What other questions do you guys have? Yes, Carl.
Not a question, I just want to add something to the dialogue. Carrie Vanderhoff is with us today, and she and Randy Woolf will be doing a pre-concert talk Saturday night starting from 6 to 6:45. Carrie is a film scholar. This is Carrie, say hello. And she and Randy have talked, and she's on the board of directors of The Block. So this is a wonderful collaboration to get her involved with Randy to talk about this. Also, tomorrow, Randy's kind of busy. You're going to, Gabe, help me out. Where's he going tomorrow morning? Mona Shores High School to meet with students on film and composing. Carrie is taking him out to Grand Valley State University tomorrow afternoon, and he will be meeting with
Audio One film students.
So we're encapsulating more than one aspect of Randy's life, all in like a short period of time. So we will really appreciate the work that he's going to be doing all tomorrow. And while Tim is trying to catch up in his sleep and rehearse. So anyway, thanks, Randy.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to go to Grand Valley because their new music ensemble is really extraordinary. Didn't they have a recording of, was it Music for 18 Musicians? Or?
I do know that their version of Terry Riley's In C was nominated for a Grammy.
Yeah, and so as soon as I heard that was a possibility, I wanted to go out there and talk to them.
Do you guys know, I think you know, do you know how amazing it is what we're doing here? Do you all realize that? I mean, we have, one of the top composers in the world today who's doing really forward-looking stuff in a way that is relevant to, people's lives. I love that word, but it's a word that it's a way that the music can really make a difference in people's lives. We have one of the top performers in the world today who we've worked with before in the concerto world, in the film world, in the video world, who's trying all kinds of amazing crossover stuff. I feel so lucky that I've had the chance to work with both of them for almost as long as they've been active. It's really, really quite amazing. So it just happens by virtue of being around for a while. But the West Michigan Symphony is doing something that we don't have to apologize and say, for our size, this is an amazing orchestra program, because for our size, this is a totally out of the stratosphere type of program. But for any orchestra, this is an amazing orchestra program. And then, the fact that we've had over the years composers in residence, and that we're almost always playing something old and something new, and keeping the audience hopefully learning and lunching together is something I'm extremely proud of. I have to give huge props to Carla and to the amazing staff of the West Michigan Symphony for making this happen and for continuing to believe in this, because there's a group of people, small and growing, that appreciate and realize what it is on a world-class level that we are creating here. that group needs to grow. You can help them grow. Can we have maybe one last question, and then we will adjourn for us to have lunch? Anything else? Yes.
My daughter comes home from time to time, and I'm just impressed with the amount of music that she shows me that's on the internet and the internet artists, and I guess especially YouTube. I mean, do you have a take on this? Is this the future? Are you going to be YouTube artists, make your living on the internet?
Well, you don't get paid very much to be on the internet. But it's, you know, it's an incredible way to distribute your music, that all of my music I just put up on my website, free to listen to, and it's been so helpful that way. It goes very much in the other direction. All of these pieces about Nepal and Tibet, Arab countries, where am I going to get this music and get examples of it? And it's nothing. I mean, the piece we did about Tibet starts with a Tibetan piece that I bought for $3 on the internet. And when I was in college, I don't even know how I would have done it at all. Perhaps I had to go to some special facility or something. So in some ways, it does make it more difficult financially for musicians, but artistically, it's just amazing. I mean, you can hear absolutely anything that you want to. So it goes back and forth, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a powerful resource for research and finding clips of anything you might want to sample. And I think also what Randy was saying also as a distribution model, it makes it infinitely easier for people to access music and to access this. I think it was almost exactly a year ago, Google had commissioned me to write a short piece for violin and orchestra for a virtual reality music video that they wanted to put up on YouTube to announce YouTube's new capability to have interactive sound mix, meaning if you put on Google Cardboard, some of you may have, if you have a subscription to the New York Times, you may have received one about a year ago. It's basically a virtual reality headset. You stick your phone in there, and all of a sudden you stick it on and you are inside a world, any number of different kinds of worlds. You turn your head, you look this way, you might see me playing over there, you might turn around and see some chickens in the back, and to have an interactive sound mix means that the world becomes even more convincing, because if you see something in front of you, you hear it coming from in front of you, and you turn your head, it's all of a sudden it's still coming from that point. And of course, with the Google YouTube connection, that distribution model was already in place, and many hundreds of thousands of people were able to watch the video. So in that way, it's really kind of, there are positive qualities and maybe some less positive qualities about that, but it's almost, I mean, it's neither here nor there, because that's just the way things have gone.
It's too late to change.
The future is right here, up here in this room. It's awesome. Thanks to all of you. Please feel free to ask some questions. Thank you.